Why should I go? Okello, this is my home.
Not an emoji. Africa is for Africans. Black Africans.
Exile, diaspora, belonging. These are some of the frequent themes that appear in Indian director Mira Nair's films, which mostly revolve around Indian individuals and communities. When asked why she focuses on these themes in a 1998 interview for the UNESCO Courier, Nair responded, "I seem to be getting some sort of reputation for making films about exile. I didn't choose this. It chose me. Distance from a community is something which used to confuse me, but now I use it as a tool for my films." Although films such as 1988's Salam Bombay and 2006's The Namesake touches on themes of exile and the Indian diaspora, I'll be discussing her 1991 romantic drama Mississippi Masala, starring Sarita Chaudhary and Denzel Washington as the romantic leads, Mina and Demetrius. Although they are the main narrative and thematic focus of the film, I will primarily be analyzing Mina's father, Jay Loha, played by Roshan Seth, whose character and story arc portrays the experience of an Indian-born Ugandan exile in the United States. This analysis is titled, Home is Where the Heart Is, Understanding Jay Loha in Mississippi Masala. The film begins in 1972 Uganda as Jay and his family are forced to leave the country along with other Indians during dictator Idi Amin's regime. After spending some time in England, the family moves to Greenwood, Mississippi, USA, and lives with family and friends at the Motel Monte Cristo. Back in Uganda, Jay was a well-to-do attorney that advocated for the rights of native Ugandans, but is now unemployed and spends his time disputing with the Ugandan government over the loss of his property.
Uganda has been my home, my country, to which I had the utmost loyalty and love, until I was forcibly and illegally expelled by General Idi Amin.
Here we see that Jay is trying to retain his original social and economic status that he had back home, which admittedly was higher above most native Ugandans. In fact, it was the British that placed Indians as a racially, socially, and economically privileged group in Uganda during its colonial rule. And even after gaining independence in 1962, would still manage to maintain those privileges until Amin came into power. Here in the States, though, Jay is isolated from those privileges as well as Greenwood's Indian community, who are mostly lower middle class and by default more socially and economically prosperous. There are instances where they comment on his family's Ugandan roots and loss of status in a mostly disparaging manner.
Nobody was hurt, Anil. What's happened has happened. No use crying over spilt milk.
Who is going to pay for this? Does money grow on trees over here? Jay, bhai, maybe in your fertile Uganda it used to grow on trees, but not here. Can't feed his own family and giving me lectures about spilt milk.
In Uganda, he was the champion defender of blacks. But the same blacks kicked him out. Right, Jay bhai?
Cruelty has no color.
That's the mother. Owns a liquor shop. Can you imagine? The father's a complete screw loose. Spends all his time suing the government of Uganda for his property.
These scenes serve as examples of how race is tied to class within this community. According to scholar Radharani Ray, because their class status in the US is better than what it might have been in India, their self-perception of their class status is higher than their actual status, especially as perceived by mainstream America. This heightened self-perception regarding race and class is yet one of the many legacies left behind from British colonialism, that the prominent Indian communities in both Uganda and Greenwood place on themselves above native Ugandans and African Americans respectively. Throughout the film, we start to see how complex and at times contradictory Jay is in regard to his connections with Uganda and Africa at large. The main scene that exemplifies this is when Demetrius tries to speak with Mina after both the African American and Indian communities learn of their relationship. As a rift starts to develop between them, Demetrius attempts to speak with Jay about the situation, but Jay tells him that there is, quote, nothing to discuss and that he doesn't want Mina to go through, quote, the same struggle as he did if she were to carry on her relationship with him.
You know, once I was like both of you. I thought I could change the world, be different. But the world is not so quick to change. Mina is my only child. I don't want her to go through the same struggle as I did.
Struggle? Look, I'm a black man born and raised in Mississippi. Ain't a damn thing you can tell me about struggle. What?
Going back on the topic of British colonialism, Jay's attempt to control the intimacy of his only daughter carries on his legacy by encouraging Indian endogamy, or staying with your own kind, as well as preventing, quote, inaccessible and unseen relationships between racialized groups, such as with Mina and Demetrius. When discussing Mina and Demetrius' relationship, as well as Jay and his childhood friend Okello, Cultural critic Benita Reddy claims that these Afro-Asian relationships serve to disorganize imperial logic. To quote her, I examine how these intimacies challenge a model of cross-racial alliance that is premised on the naturalization of heteronormative kinship. Intimacy can be productive of precisely such a troubling refusing to answer to the machinations of law, rule, and habit that govern identity. Later in the film, Jay has a flashback of him and his friends drinking in Uganda on what was supposed to be their last day in the country, and this exchange happens.
To Uganda, to Uganda, you have been so good to us until this madman came.
Yeah, we created the madman. We buggers in Uganda. Most people are born with 5 senses. We are left with only one. The sense of property.
Here we see that Jay is fully aware of the privilege he has as an Indian born in colonial Uganda, even to the point where he refers to him and other Indians as buggers, a British term that refers to an unpleasant or undesirable person for their entitled sense of property. This legal entitlement to property was also encouraged under British imperialism, and along with notions of anti-blackness and ethnic insularity, would result in lingering resentment of Ugandan Indians by most of the native Ugandan population, one of which was Idi Amin, who weaponized these sentiments by expelling the Indian population out of Uganda.
Africans are poor, Asians are rich. The Asians are sabotaging the economy of Uganda.
God knows what will happen now.
They have refused to allow their daughters to marry Africans.
In a way, Jay becomes a quote bugger as well. In addition to experiencing homesickness in earnest, he spends the majority of the film trying to legally regain his property, illustrating what Benita Reddy refers to as post-imperial melancholia, or viewing nation as property, which occurs after having to detach from proprietary and economic privileges in post-colonial nations, thusly reinforcing British colonialism's, quote, proper distribution of sentiments and desires in regards to property and Indian men.
I'm going to get our property back.
How can you even think of going back to Uganda?
You know, we are getting old. I don't want to die in some stranger's country.
In the final act, Jay eventually returns to Uganda. Throughout the film, this seems to be Jay's primary goal, to be able to appeal to the government and regain his property. However, rather than immediately carrying on with the lawsuit, he instead first attempts to reconnect with Okello at the school where he worked at, but learns from a staff member that he was killed during Amin's regime. It is here where we, the audience, become fully aware of Jay's desire to still remain in contact with Okello, even after being exiled.
How did he die?
Disappeared one day. They found his body. I'm sorry.
I wrote him so many letters.
Distraught over this revelation, he then goes to his former family home, and the once lush and scenic estate is now unkempt and unrecognizable after years of exile. Nair uses this contrast to illustrate Jay's own experience as a diasporic person, once again returning home, but unable to recognize it. As Abdul Jalil states, home should be that which one cannot not want. It stands for a safe place, where there is no need to explain oneself to outsiders. It stands for community, more problematically. It can elicit a nostalgia for a past golden age that never was, a nostalgia that elides exclusion, power relations, and difference. All Jay can do now at this point is sit, reflect, and reach his own conclusion about home and symbolically his identity to Kinu in the form of a letter.
Now he's dead, Kinu. Since I've been back, I've thought so much of you. Which is why I say to hell with the lawsuit. Home is where the heart is. And my heart is with you.
After reaching this conclusion, Mississippi Masala ends Jay's story arc with him walking along the streets of Kampala and comes across a crowd watching a woman dance. The song she's dancing to is called Ndeke by the Ugandan band Afrigo, which sings about the yearning of a loved one that resides in Uganda. As this scene continues, a small Ugandan child touches his face. Moved by this gesture, Jay proceeds to carry and embrace the child as more people join in to dance. In this moment, there are 3 things that are certain. Although he doesn't have his property, he feels like he's back home once again. Although he seems to be the only Indian in this mostly native Ugandan crowd, he feels like he's back with his community. And lastly, this closing scene is solid proof that home is, truly, where the heart is.